Hi guys, my name is Mark Law, creator of Rational Wine, Consult Wine, and 7 Key Wine Concepts. In this video, I will be talking about wine faults. So we learned how to analyze a wine's flavors and aromas, we got deeper into the structural elements, and then we learned how to qualify the wine. Is it poor, acceptable, good, very good, and outstanding? But there's no point going through all of those steps if the wine happens to be faulty in the first place. It's a sad fact of life that not every time you open a wine, it's going to be fine. So I want you to be prepared to reject wines if they happen to be messed up. Before we start, there are faults that are unconditionally faulty, but there are aromas where if it's at a very low level, it's acceptable. Sometimes it's desirable because it actually adds complexity to the wine. But of course, if they happen to be too intense, then that's when you can decide to say that this wine might be faulty. So just want you to keep that in mind. I will cover each of these points individually as we go along. Let's get started. Generally, wine faults can come from 4 sources: contamination, oxidation, reduction, and microbes. Contamination is specifically anything that comes from outside of the wine. Examples include M.O.G or M.O.G, smoke taint, and the cork in the bottle of the wine. Oxidation is any chemical process that involves oxygen. So imagine you have a green apple, cut it in half, and that white flesh, slowly it turns brown because it's exposed to oxygen. And then you've got reduction, which is any chemical process that does not involve oxygen. Finally, you've got microbes, which include yeasts and bacteria. And there are many different strains and types that produce many different aromas and flavors. Some of them desirable, some of them not desirable. So once again, 4 sources of faults: contamination, oxidation, reduction, and microbes. Now let's look at each of these one by one to see what we can expect. In the contamination category, the most important fault to keep in mind is cork taint. You can recognize this from a smell of wet carpet, moldy newspaper, or wet dog. This is one of the few aromas which are completely unacceptable at any level. So I've mentioned this in another video, but if you do happen to come across a wine that does have cork taint, take it back to the shop, ask for a refund or an exchange, or if you're in a restaurant, ask the sommelier or a manager for another bottle of the same wine, or just order a completely different wine. M.O.G or M.O.G, if you watched the first video, you'll remember that this stands for matter other than grapes, because not all wines are taken care of by hand with tender loving care. Once you get below a certain price point, mechanization becomes a factor. And mechanization is fast and you can work on a large scale, but of course it's more rough and there's possibly less selection happening there. So this M.O.G, this matter other than grapes, might end up in the final wine. One example that's well documented is ladybug taint, where actual ladybugs get caught up in the harvesting. And you can imagine a few thousand tiny ladybugs amongst millions of grape berries. I don't come across this very often, but you can recognize it by a sense of greenness that's very intense, or if it reminds you of rancid peanut butter, then that is quite possibly ladybug taint. Please keep an eye out for that. I'd like to briefly mention smoke taint because where I am right now, this is not an uncommon issue. You might have seen on the news at the beginning of the year how Australia was on fire. And we've already had a few wine regions declare that they won't be harvesting anything this year. So that's a whole year's worth of work and potential earnings gone. And now we have this global health fiasco happening, so it's crazy. Just want to take a moment here and ask, please, wherever you are in the world, if you have some small producers nearby who you love and respect, and if you know they're struggling, see if there's any way you can help out. It might be a small wine producer who might have organized deliveries to the home. There might be meat or vegetable providors who usually supply to restaurants, but of course restaurants are closed now. See if they're supplying directly to the home, and if you can give them some support, please. Next category is oxidation. Some aromas associated with oxidation include bruised apple, nuts, sherry, balsamic vinegar, nail polish remover. In these examples, it is a matter of how intense they come across. If they are unreasonably intense and out of balance, then it might be possible that the wine is faulty. But in some examples, when they're at very low levels, a little bit of bruised apple, a little bit of nut and sherry, it can add complexity to the wine. So pay attention to how these things are balanced. The next category is reduction, and common aromas associated with reduction include rotten egg, rotten cabbage, rubber, onion, garlic, canned corn, asparagus. If these, again, are overwhelmingly intense, then you can say that's faulty, and you can sort of sense that even at low levels, these are the sort of aromas that you don't usually enjoy in a wine. Because these wine aromas are associated with a lack of oxygen, one way you might try to mitigate it is by decanting the wine. So you pour the wine from the bottle into a large carafe or a decanter, and you hope that the air will blow off those unwanted aromas. So before writing off the wine, see if decanting will help it out at all, and give it another taste. Of all the microbial faults, I'll be focusing especially on Brett or Brettanomyces. That's the name of one of these strains of yeasts that are in play. There's a broad range of aromas that come under the heading of Brett. You might commonly hear barnyard, horse, leather, smoke, and band-aid or disinfectant. In these cases, at very low levels, they can be considered acceptable, and you might actually find them quite often in some old world red wines. But if they become too intense, then you can begin to argue that it might be faulty. This can be a bit subjective because, for example, I can enjoy a bit of Brett in my wines, whereas some of my colleagues in the wine industry, they can't tolerate any level of Brett at all. So see what works for you. Some other microbial faults include mousiness, which smells like a mouse cage or cardboard, and ropiness, which is more of a textural fault. It almost seems like a egg white in your glass, so pay attention to these as well. When considering these wine faults, I'd like you to consider the age of the wines as well, because as a wine ages, we say the primary characters, that fresh fruit and floral, it begins to drop out, leaving only those savory secondary and tertiary characters behind. For example, an old white wine, maybe 10, 20 years old or more, it's more likely going to show those tertiary nutty bruised apple characters, and some red wines might show more of that balsamic vinegar and earth and leather, for example. So in this case, this is actually a feature of the wine, not necessarily a fault, but you can argue that the wine has aged too long and it's past its best. So please keep that in mind as well. I also want to point out the possibility that you might be less sensitive or even blind to specific aromas. This is called anosmia. It's been shown that there are genetic differences between people who are more or less sensitive to certain aromas. For example, I suspect that I might be anosmic to mousiness. So whenever I feel that a wine is less than perfect, I will hand the wine to a colleague just to make sure I get a second opinion. And my advice to you though, in regards to anosmia, don't worry too much about it. Just focus on the things that you can sense in the wine. I only wanted to mention this because it's a reminder that yes, people are different. By all means, ask for a second opinion if you feel unsure, but these days the quality of wines are at such a high level that you will rarely have a problem. And that's all I want to talk about in this video. Again, I have left out a few things, especially the long names of different strains of yeast and bacteria and chemical compounds. I just want to keep the most important information for you. Basically, I want you to smell a wine, and I don't want you to think, oh yeah, this is associated with methoxypyrazine or benzene methanethiol. I just want you to notice if it's off, and then just push the glass away, ask for another wine when the time comes. And with this video, I think it marks the end of a series. You've learned how a wine is made, vinification. You've learned about the environment where a wine is made, viticulture. We've learned how to categorize the wine's aromas and flavors. And we've learned to analyze the wine structure. and we've also learned to objectively judge a wine's quality, and with this video you know what to look for in wine faults. With all of this information, I think you should feel a lot more confident when you go into a wine shop and grab a bottle, or if you happen to be in a wine bar or restaurant. A lot of the information I researched for this video came from a podcast hosted by Guild Som. I will leave a link in the description below. Please check it out. It does get a bit technical though, so don't feel like you have to listen to the whole thing, but if you are interested, it's there for you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. If you have any questions, please send me a direct message or leave a comment below, or you can send me an email, and my email address is in the description. Cheers, see you again soon.